Hello and welcome back, wherever you may be on a planet where everything is calm and peaceful. Apart from one or two small things. Gurdjieff was trying to teach us the law, or the way to live, that is in accordance with the rhythms and needs of this planet, and that reflects the inner structure of life itself, hidden underneath the life that we know. Today I have some passages about the two higher centers and their relationship to the consort of 5 lower centers. And I've got 2 quotes from Fourth Way teachers that are vague, and I will sharpen them up in order to illuminate some of Gurdjieff's other ideas. And a little bit of Irish folklore and a discussion on what a causal being really is.
You have to have an aim, right, to awaken.
Right.
If you have an aim to make money, that's not really an aim, right? That leads to nothing. This is an aim that leads to immortality and intelligence and conscience.
Here we are told that we should not have the aim to make money, but to become awakened. But that is not the meaning that Gurdjieff used with the word aim. Gurdjieff was talking of any aim whatsoever that you disciplined yourself along, and that forced your inner powers in pursuit of that particular aim, whatever it may be, whether it may be warfare, religious, whether it may be mercantile, anything whatsoever in the prism of life. And he was showing what the original design of life was, which was to master a craft, to master yourself, which is quite different from our understanding of religions, of trying to be a holy person, which has something good about it, but has become decoupled from living on this planet and the work we have to do with our hands, our families, and our societies. Now let's listen to Gurdjieff himself talking about this subject. Crystallization is possible on any foundation. Take, for example, a brigand, a really good, genuine highway bandit. I knew such brigands in the Caucasus. He will stand with a rifle behind a stone by the roadside for 8 hours without stirring. Could you do that? All the time, mind you, a struggle is going on in him. He is thirsty and hot, and flies are biting him, but he stands still. Another type is a monk. He is afraid of the devil. All night long he beats his head on the floor and he prays. Thus, crystallization is achieved. In such ways, people can generate in themselves an enormous inner strength. They can endure torture. They can get what they want. This means that there is now in them something solid, something permanent. Such people can become immortal. It doesn't matter what you choose, but choose something and stick with it. And in previous times, everything, every single part of human life in Britain was a guild, was a chain of learning, generation to generation, passing down like a waterfall. Everything from the aristocracy to the midwifery, to the feudal structure of agriculture, to jurisprudence and the legal system, everything. They were like rays of the sun, reaching from the heart of the kingdom all the way to the edges of the realm. This is the second. It comes from Ouspensky. In order to come to ourselves, we have to travel light and leave all our heavy luggage behind. We have to retreat from complexity to simplicity, to see things from above, not from below. After all, there are only 3 rooms in the house man lives: intellect, emotion, and the physical activity. In order to build a house, you need constant physical effort. No brick will arrange itself on the others. You have to put it in there. But no amount of physical effort by itself will enable you to invent. For instance, an electric bell or a telephone. This requires energy of a different kind. Furthermore, no amount of physical strength or inventiveness will enable an artist to paint an original picture, merely from physical work or inventiveness. And nor intellectual nor emotional effort will enable a man to discover and remember himself. That requires energy quite different again, the energy of a consciousness. Okay. I don't like the way Ouspensky is unable to make the connections between the levels. Because the connections between the levels is really the whole point. There is a connection between the moving center and the emotional, and between the emotional and the intellectual, and between the fusion of those into a higher sense of identity that is known as consciousness. That is exactly why Gurdjieff taught the Gurdjieff movements, where the body was put in many different types of positions. That is exactly why he taught you to do the washing up with the left hand. It changes you in a way that you do not expect. The same way you are changed if you master a craft and you cut wood one way and then the other way, this way and then that way, slightly varying it every time until a network of knowledge is created inside of you. But that is the art, because the plane of the intellect, the emotional and the physical, they are deployed according to the laws of the octave, and the reweaving together is our work. That is the real magic. And someone who is working and hungry, he starts to feel something flow inside of him. He starts to move easily, cutting almost like an artist, like a dance, like the wind. One day he becomes like the wind and he flies through his work. And if he is able to continue, one day he becomes like light itself. And meanwhile the cutting is still going on. And when things shimmer inside of you, things will shimmer outside of you. But these 2 passages come from men born in the modern world, a world where people think they have everything. But where is the heart? Where is the heart? Where is the heart in all of this? Our ordinary centers, in transmitting the impressions of the higher centers, may be compared to a blind man speaking of colors, or to a deaf man speaking of music. In order to obtain a correct and a permanent connection between the lower and the higher centers, it is necessary to regulate and quicken the work of the lower centers. Moreover, as has been already said, the lower centers work in a wrong way very often. Instead of their own proper functions, one or another of them takes upon itself the work of other centers. This considerably reduces the speed of the general work of the machine, and makes acceleration of the work of the centers very difficult. Thus, In order to regulate and accelerate the work of the lower centers, the primary object must consist in freeing each center from work foreign and unnatural to it, and in bringing it back to its own work which it can do better than any other center. The development of the human machine and the enrichment of being begins with the new and unaccustomed functioning of this machine. We know that a man has 5 centers: the thinking, the emotional, the moving, the instinctive, and the sex. The predominant development of any one center at the expense of others produces an extremely one-sided type of man, incapable of further development. But if a man brings the work of the 5 centers within him into harmonious accord, he then locks the pentagram within him and becomes a finished type of the physically perfect man. The full and proper functioning of 5 centers brings them into a union with the higher centers, which introduces the missing principle and puts man into direct and permanent connection with objective consciousness and objective knowledge. And then man becomes the 6-pointed star, that is, by becoming locked within a circle of life independent and complete in itself, he becomes isolated from foreign influences or accidental shocks. He embodies in himself the seal of Solomon. Realizing the imperfection and weakness of ordinary language, the people who have possessed objective knowledge have tried to express the idea of unity in myths and in symbols, and in particular verbal formulas which, having been transmitted without alteration, have carried on the idea from one school to another, from one epoch to another. It has already been said that the higher psychic centers work in man's higher states of consciousness, the higher emotional and the higher mental. The aim of myths and symbols was to reach man's higher centers, to transmit to him ideas inaccessible to the intellect, and to transmit them in such forms as would exclude the possibility of false interpretations. Myths destined for the higher emotional center, symbols for the higher thinking center. It is always possible to understand anything, but only with the appropriate center. But the preparation for receiving ideas belonging to objective knowledge has to proceed by way of the mind, for only a mind properly prepared can transmit these ideas to the higher centers without introducing elements foreign to them. The symbols that were used to transmit ideas belonging to objective knowledge included diagrams of the fundamental laws of the universe, and they not only transmitted the knowledge itself, but showed also the way to it. The study of symbols, their construction and meaning, formed a very important part of the preparation for receiving objective knowledge, and it was in itself a test, because a literal or formal understanding of symbols at once made it impossible to receive any further knowledge. Symbols were divided into the fundamental and the subordinate. The first included the principles of separate domains of knowledge. The second expressed the essential nature of phenomena in their relation to unity. This present teaching differs from many others by the fact that it affirms that the higher centers exist in man and are fully developed. It is the lower centers that are undeveloped, and it is precisely this lack of development or the incomplete functioning of the lower centers that prevents us from making use of the work of the higher centers. I'm going to read a particular passage from Gurdjieff that I think is very important. And it is just as important to understand it as to have a teacher who has himself, who is within the stream of the teaching. And to bear in mind that the law is the same for all planes and scales. He says, when such a special matter accumulates in sufficient quantities, it may begin to crystallize, as salt begins to crystallize in water if more than a certain proportion of it is added. when a great deal of fine matter accumulates in a man, there comes a moment when a new body can form and crystallize in him the dough of a new octave, a higher octave. This body, often called the astral, can only be formed from this special matter and cannot come into being unconsciously. If we look at the yogic scheme of koshas, the sheaths of the body, it does appear that there are always people on the planet who somehow are able to understand these things. Gurdjieff says, "The second body of man is the soul in relation to the physical body, although in itself it is also divided into three principles. Taken as a whole, it represents the active force in relation to the passive, which is the physical body. The neutralizing principle between them is a special magnetism." I'll come back to this another day, but it's interesting to see the almost complete correspondence. Last week I put up an image of Queen Maeve and the Druid, which comes from Irish folklore, part of the ancient Western canon. And she was said to have had 7 children. And there is an older name for those 7 children and a newer name for those 7 children. Fedlimid Kerbre Oachaid Fergus Set Sin Dair Athramail Mathramail Andoi Tai Morgor Milskotach Moipert. Although I am not British, I can taste something in those words. Meaning that was developed by the British people through their encounter with life. Their culture was the result of effort according to their own inner qualities, confronting the outer qualities of the land that they lived in. And that created unique feelings and sounds inside of the words, which are a projection of the law. Those things are pre-Christian, perhaps pre-Roman. I have to search quite sensitively inside to hear it. It's like hearing the echo of history from a long time ago. And Gurdjieff said that he would work himself half to death just to hear something real come out of the mouth of one of his students. So precious was it. Thank you for listening. Take care.